want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the China Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines this hour. French President Emmanuel Macron gears up to visit Beijing today. He is expected to put pressure on his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping to help secure a ceasefire in Ukraine and discuss trade relations. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung urges Seoul to remain neutral in this spat between Japan and China over Taiwan, urges neutrality in escalating tension between the two countries. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer warns that China poses national security threats to Britain, defends government's decision to step up engagement with the country for business, however. US President Donald Trump signs into law a measure forcing the US State Department to review guidelines for the country's engagement with Taiwan amid escalating concerns that China could move against the self-governing island. China moves to impose a value-added tax on contraceptive drugs and devices, including condoms, in its latest attempt to reverse plunging birth rates that threaten to further slow its economy. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung calls for neutrality in Japan-China-Taiwan tension, also discusses challenges of building nuclear submarines with the US. US-Russia find no compromise on key territory issue after Ukraine talks. Kremlin says Ukraine talks with US useful but a lot of work ahead. South Korean president makes a special address on one-year anniversary of Yoon's failed martial law bid. Lee says future generations must not go through crises like the martial law. And big news coming on Russia-Ukraine talks for peace. Russian presidential envoy Kirill Dmitriev has called Ukraine peace talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff productive. Meanwhile, Kremlin aide Yuri Ushakov has said that the 5-hour-long talks were constructive but made no breakthrough on the Ukraine peace deal. Ushakov has added that no compromise was reached on territorial concessions by Ukraine. He described the talks as useful but stated that there is a lot of work to be done and that contacts between the US and Russia will continue. Let's in fact listen into Ushakov's remarks.
Мы, естественно, с американскими коллегами обсудили содержание тех проектов, тех документов, которые американцы какое-то время назад передали в Москву, прошлись по этим документам. Мы не обсуждали конкретные формулировки, конкретные американские предложения, а обсуждали суть того, что заложено в эти американские документы. С чем-то мы могли согласиться, и президент это подтвердил своим собеседникам. Что-то у нас вызвало критику, и президент тоже не скрывал наше критическое и даже отрицательное отношение к ряду предложений.
Как вы считаете, по итогам переговоров ближе стали к миру или дальше?
Не дальше, это точно. Не дальше, это точно. Но предстоит еще большая работа, как в Вашингтоне, так и в Москве. Условлено об этом, и контакты будут продолжены, как я сказал. Пока еще компромиссного варианта найдено не было, но некоторые американские наработки, они выглядят более-менее приемлемо, но их нужно обсуждать.
Meanwhile, Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has called the war in Ukraine a mess and not an easy situation to resolve at his final cabinet meeting of 2025. Let's listen in.
As you know, we have a problem with a war that our people are trying to settle now with Russia and Ukraine. We are not involved in the war monetarily anymore. Biden gave away $350 billion like it was candy. That's a massive amount of money. And much of it in cash, a lot of it in equipment. I don't give away anything. We sell the equipment to NATO. The European nations pay us for the equipment, 100% price. And then they bring it to Ukraine or whatever they do with it. But we're trying to get that settled. I've settled 8 wars. This would be the 9th. And our people are over in Russia right now to see if we can get it settled. Not an easy situation. Let me tell you what a mess. It's a war that never would have happened if I were president. Not even a chance. And it didn't happen.
Let's now welcome Satoru Nagao, who's fellow at the Hudson Institute, joining us live from Tokyo. Thank you, Satoru, for joining us this morning at News X World. Now, talks are held, but if Russia says there's going to be no compromise on the territorial issue, how is Ukraine to react and how are peace talks expected to proceed from here?
Of course, it is not easy to proceed. In this ceasefire agreement can made if both sides can declare the victory. So that's why this is a win-win. That's why it has happened. And in this case, the 2 issues are very important. First issue is, of course, the territorial issue. And the reason Russia invaded Ukraine related with the 2 states in the eastern side of the Ukraine. So that's why Russia tried to get 2. But this means that Ukraine will lose these 2 states. So that's why this is one kind of the zero sum. So that's why if Russia will not concede, of course, the Ukraine side do not have the will to abandon the territories they lost. So that's why it is not easy. And in this case, we should remember what happened in the Korean Peninsula after the Korean War. Because the Korean War is still legally, it is continuing. So that's why the combat is ceased, but at the same time, legally, this is under war. But the line between South Korea and North Korea is fixed under the agreement. So same things could happen if Russia and Ukraine agree in this place. So that's why the concession of the territory is very serious and critical. But and another one in the topic is, of course, securing Ukraine after the war. In this case, Russia also opposed this because if the NATO country deploys the forces in the ceasefire line between Russia and Ukraine, Russia cannot expand territory in the future, not easy at least, so that's why they oppose it. So Russia opposed both case, the territorial case and securing Ukraine case. In both cases, Russia opposed because Russia want to expand the territory in Ukraine, and if the war has ceased temporarily, but in the future they want to expand too. So that's why it is not easy to agree in a ceasefire, which could be fixed like the Korean War. This means that Russia cannot expand anymore in the future. So it is a very difficult negotiation now.
And Mr. Nagao, how do you weigh Trump's statement also now coming in his final cabinet meet of this year? He says the war situation between Ukraine and Russia is a mess, one that even he has not been able to resolve so far, having claimed that he's mediated in 8 other wars and been able to resolve those, but not this one.
President Trump's image is unpredictability. So that's why the unpredictable president means that there is no victory scenario for invaders. So that's why it is not easy. That is true, I think. But at the same time, Russia's invasion to Ukraine has already started. and continue the war, and the Russian side do not have the will to cease. In this case, it is very difficult for the Trump administration to stop Russia, the war in Ukraine. So that is the current situation. So if the Russia will not stop the aggression in Ukraine, of course the United States need to strengthen the sanction against Russia. That will happen, I think. But view from the United States to deal with China, they want to divide Russia and China. And in this case, Russia's aggression to Ukraine and related with this, they need to impose sanctions. This is not a good situation for the United States, they think. So that's why the view from the world, the U.S. do not want to do that. At least the Trump administration do not want to do that. But the view from the reality, they need to do that. They need to impose strong sanction to Russia. So that is the current situation I analysis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Nagao, for joining us and speaking to us this morning, but I request you to stay on. We now move on, viewers. French President Emmanuel Macron has arrived in Beijing for a high-stakes visit focused squarely on the war in Ukraine. Macron will be meeting China's President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang, urging Beijing to use its influence over Moscow to help secure a long-awaited Russia-Ukraine ceasefire. France says China, as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has a responsibility to push Russia toward ending the conflict. But previous appeals from Macron have brought little movement, and China still refuses to condemn Russia's 2022 invasion, even as Western governments accuse Beijing of supplying key components to Russia's defense industry. Macron's three-day visit to China comes just after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited Paris, warning Europe to stay united. Macron is also due to discuss trade with his Chinese hosts. And we now move on to news from South Korea, where President Lee Jae-myung says the country still has unfinished work in dealing with the fallout from last year's failed martial law attempt. In a special address marking the first-year anniversary of the botched coup, Lee said the nation's constitutional order was protected because ordinary citizens stepped forward to defend democracy. He announced plans to propose December 3 as the People's Sovereignty Day, saying citizens deserve recognition and should even be considered for the Nobel Peace Prize. The failed martial law bid was launched by former President Yoon Suk-yeol on December 3, 2024, plunging South Korea into months of political turmoil. Yoon was eventually removed from office, and Lee, who had lost to Yoon in 2022 election, returned to win with a snap vote in June this year, with a mandate to stabilize the country and restore public trust. Listen in.
이체 혁명으로 탄생한 국민 주권 정부는 우리 국민의 위대한 용기와 행동을 기리기 위해 12월 3일을 국민 주권의 날로 지정할 것입니다. 대한민국이 존재하는 한 헌정 질서와 민주주의를 지켜낸 것을 함께 기념하고 더 굳건한 민주주의를 다짐하는 계기로 삼겠습니다. 신이 쿠데타 가담자들에 대한 엄정한 처벌은 그 시작입니다. 사적 야욕을 위해 헌정 질서를 파괴하고 심지어 전쟁까지 획책한 그 무도함은 반드시 심판받아야 합니다.
And I'd now request Mr. Nagao to join us back in this discussion. Mr. Nagao, crucial statement now coming in from South Korea that says that the cleanup of the martial law mess is not yet complete. What more should we expect? Am I audible, Mr. Nagao?
Okay. 1 year ago, the martial law imposed by the former President Yoon was failed. So that is a good thing for the democracy, because the democratic country should not be changed their regime by force, by call. But that is true. But at the same time, in case of South Korea's politics, there is another traditional fact which is not good for the South Korea is all presidents need to go jail after their tenure. So that's why this is the situation. So view from the democracy, they are improving the situation. That is true. That is a good thing. But at the same time, why in the South Korea's politics, everyone need to go jail after tenure? But that is a little bit unfortunate fact, I believe. But that is a little bit sad situation.
All right. I thank you, Mr. Nagao, for joining us and giving your comment on this. And with that, viewers, we now shift our focus and move on to some other pressing developments coming from Seoul. South Korea's President Lee Jae-myung has also said that Seoul should not take sides as Japan and China intensify their dispute over Taiwan. Speaking at a news conference, he used a Korean saying to stress that stopping a fight is better than choosing a winner. He warned that taking sides would deepen tension in a region he described as highly dangerous for military security. The dispute escalated after Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi suggested Tokyo could act militarily if China invades Taiwan. Beijing responded with diplomatic criticism and advised its citizens to avoid traveling to Japan. Cultural events have also been affected, including the cancellation of a Japanese singer's show in Shanghai. China continues to view Taiwan as its territory and has not ruled out using force to bring the island under its control. Let's listen in.
일본과 중국이 갈등을 겪고 있는데 우리가 한쪽 편을 들거나 그렇게 하는 것은 갈등을 격화시키는 요인입니다. 개인 간의 관계도 마찬가지고 국가 간 관계도 마찬가지지만 최대한 공존하고 존중하고 협력하는 것이 바람직합니다.
All right, and joining us in this discussion is Andrew K.P. Leong, China strategist, joins us live from Hong Kong. Thank you, Mr. Leong, for joining us this morning in India from NewsX World. How do you view the statement that's coming in from South Korea? What does it really talk about the nation's foreign policy?
It's not surprising. If you look at the Southeast Asian countries, very few of them want to take sides in the rivalry between the two great superpowers, the United States and China, particularly for South Korea, because South Korea is also an ally with the United States. Don't forget that there are American forces stationed in South Korea, mainly against the North Korean aggression. But nevertheless, American troops are deployed in South Korea. And South Korea also recently has formed an alliance, closer military alliance with Japan. Again, it's part of this United States anti-China policy, a China containment policy. Because if you look at how the United States is dealing with expanded China's influence in the Asia Pacific, you have the first island chain standing in Okinawa, second island chain standing in Guam with lots of American assets. And the United States is now putting South Korea and Japan closer together militarily to contain China in the north of the South China Sea. And then south, you have the AUKUS with Australia, United Kingdom, and the United States submarine power deal. And then, of course, you have the Quad with Australia and India, and Japan to contain China. So if you look at the Asia-Pacific China containment policy, South Korea is a very important part of it. But on the other hand, South Korea doesn't want to make an enemy of China. Economically, a lot of South Korean businesses are in China, producing a lot of stuff for shipment worldwide. And South Korea, of course, relies on China as a counterweight against North Korea. Because the stability of the Korean Peninsula is also very important to South Korea. So that's why South Korea doesn't want to be forced to choose. And this kind of attitude of not being forced to choose is very common among ASEAN member states.
All right, thanks for your comment there, Mr. Leong. Viewers, crucial here how South Korea is choosing to maintain neutrality between the China-Japan spat over Taiwan. And with that, viewers, we move on to another development in this regard coming from the United States, where President Donald Trump has signed into law a measure of forcing U.S. State Department to review guidelines for the country's engagement with Taiwan. Amid the escalating concerns that China could move against the self-governing island. The measure requires periodic State Department reviews to explain how the guidelines deepen the relation between U.S. and Taiwan. The reviews, conducted at least every 5 years, must also outline ways to remove self-imposed restrictions on U.S.-Taiwan engagement. However, Trump's signature comes after a call in which Chinese President Xi Jinping stressed that unification remains vital for Beijing, which views the self-ruled democracy of Taiwan as part of territory. Meanwhile, U.S. Representative Ann Wagner, the Missouri Republican, has said that U.S. stands strong against the Chinese Communist Party's dangerous efforts to dominate Taiwan. And I'd now request Mr. Leong to join us back into this discussion here. Mr. Leong, now U.S. leaders have traditionally maintained an approach of strategic ambiguity when it comes to Taiwan. But now with Trump signing this bill to deepen ties with Taiwan, how is China expected to react?
Well, this increased military ties with Taiwan also is part and parcel of the United States' consistent policy towards Taiwan, because that's defined by the Taiwan Relations Act, which was enacted decades ago at the time when the United States chose to recognize the People's Republic of China as representing the whole of China, and hence the One China policy, and de-recognizing Taiwan. But on the other hand, there was the China-Taiwan Relations Act, empowering the United States government to continue to supply arms for Taiwan to defend itself. Now, this latest deal only doubles down on this policy. The latest policy, of course, is try to turn Taiwan into a military porcupine. You know, the animal with a lot of spikes, a military porcupine, so that Taiwan can defend itself. Now, the American Taiwan policy is defined consistently by three documents or enactments. The first one, of course, the Taiwan Relations Act, which I have explained. The second one is the so-called three communiques, defining Taiwan, the United States' continued support for Taiwan, and opposes unilateral use of force to change the status quo, and the so-called six assurances. The assurances were given by the previous President Reagan. The assurances amount to several key tenets. The first one, the United States takes no position on the future of Taiwan. Secondly, continue to oppose unilateral solution of the Taiwan question, which is to be left to the Taiwan people. Thirdly, the United States takes no role in mediating between Taiwan and Beijing on the future of Taiwan. But of course, the preference is for the Taiwan question to be resolved peacefully through negotiations. So this kind of strategy squares with a much misunderstood Beijing strategy on Taiwan. Now, Beijing, of course, wants Taiwan to be reunited. President Xi already said a number of times that the latest time for unification is 2049, which is still some years back. But it's also defined by the three white papers on Taiwan, the last coinciding with the Nancy Pelosi's previous provocative visit to Taiwan. All the three papers stress preference for peaceful unification. Now, the peaceful unification is defined by three strategic strategies. The first one is, of course, military deterrence against any unilateral attempt to declare independence or other forces intervening to push Taiwan towards independence. Secondly, also a kind of economic and diplomatic isolation of Taiwan, where very few countries around the world recognize Taiwan now. The latest is the St. Tom one of the specific islands with the change of government to a pro-Beijing government, and that would reduce the number of countries recognizing Taiwan. The third and last but not least is the people-to-people exchanges. The two countries, the people are visiting one another. Lots of Taiwanese businesses already operating on the mainland. As many as 300,000 Taiwanese together with families already living on the mainland. So with more people exchanges with military deterrence and also economic and diplomatic isolation, the momentum is set for Taiwan to be pushed towards the negotiating table for peaceful unification, and that squares with the United States policy of Taiwan.
All right. Well, thank you for that perspective, Mr. Liang. But I request you to stay on as we have another crucial development coming in from China that I'd like your comment on. Now, viewers, China will impose a value-added tax on contraceptive drugs and devices for the first time in more than 30 years as it seeks to reverse plunging birth rates. A newly revised VAT law adds a 13% tax on items such as condoms, which have been exempt since 1993 during the one-child policy era. At the same time, Beijing is offering incentives for families by exempting childcare services, elder care, disability services and marriage-related services starting January. Now, the shift reflects China's growing concern over a shrinking population with just 9.54 million births recorded last year. But rising childbearing costs and an uncertain economy continue to deter young people from having children. The new tax has also sparked debate online, with some warning it could discourage safe sex at a time when HIV cases in China are on the rise. Others dismiss the measure as symbolic, questioning how higher condom prices would encourage childbirth when many already feel they cannot afford to raise a child. And I'd request Mr. Liang to join us back once again into the discussion here. Mr. Liang, this is a crucial development that's coming in. How do you view it, given that the cost of raising a child up to the age of 18 for young adults is not easy at a time when the economy is rather slow and the job market is unstable in China?
Well, the unwillingness for childbirth and for to get married actually is not only because China but also Japan and some other countries in Asia, because the cost of childbearing are very high, together with especially in China, and together with the cost of education, the cost of raising the children so that they have a brighter future, to get to the best universities. All these costs are very, very prohibitive at a time when the economy is not doing very well. And so this translates, and also there are relative less generous social provision, medical facilities or medical care, and so people are sitting up for the rainy day. So all these translates to unwillingness to get married, unwillingness to have children, and that's why increasing the tax on condoms or whatever is not going to change the picture. But on the other hand, in the coming 5-year plan for the year 2026 to 2030, China is going to put a lot of effort in doing something about the worsening demographics, including maybe better social provision, better child care facilities, and also increasing salaries for the young people, and also clamping down on the property market. And making it easier for people to own homes. So hopefully this would arrest the further decline of the Chinese demographics. But Chinese demographics is a given now because of the huge momentum created, left over by the One China policy. And to address that, China is increasing its productivity by pivoting towards high technology, to AI and other technologies that define 21st century. Because that would increase productivity without a lot of human labor. So a declining demographics is not the be all and end all of China's economic dynamics.
All right. Thank you for now joining us here at News X World. Mr. Liang, we appreciate you giving us your time. And viewers, that's a wrap on the China Report. But do keep watching News X World for more international news updates from around the world.